Good morning to those of you who have already joined us. We will be getting started in 1 or 2 minutes here. So thanks for everybody who's on. Hopefully you didn't have any difficulties joining the webinar. And if you are having any difficulties, you can't use the chat, but you can submit questions in the Q&A. So if something is amiss, please let me know through that function. Otherwise, we will just wait for our presenters who are all on, but just give them a minute to get their videos up and running, and then we will get started as it is 11 o'clock. There we go. Okay, sorry, I've got a lot of windows open on a secondary screen and it was taking me a minute to see all the presenters. But now that I see everybody's on, I just want to say good morning one more time. Welcome to the webinar on immigrant eligibility for health insurance programs. My name is Shannon Drake Burr and I'm with Covering Wisconsin, and I have the privilege this morning to present with two absolutely wonderful women, Caroline Gomez-Tom, who is also with Covering Wisconsin. Caroline, can you give us a wave? And Janice Beers, who's a DOJ accredited representative with the Catholic Multicultural Center. Good morning, Caroline and Janice.
Good morning.
We're going to do just a couple housekeeping items and then we'll dive right into it. Caroline will be starting us off with the content of our presentation. But just so all attendees know, you are on mute and you cannot chat, but you can use the question and answer function to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. I will be moderating questions and sorting through them as they come in and asking our presenters to pause at logical points in the presentation when we can address your questions. And we will do our best to address them throughout the presentation. And then hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the very end to take additional questions. We don't want people to be distracted by that burning question in your mind, and we hope we can get you an answer in an appropriate place. I also want to let you all know that we will be recording this webinar and we will be posting it on our website under the Covering Wisconsin Assisters training page, so you can look for it there. It will take us a few days to get it posted, so we just ask your patience and you can check for it there. And with that, here is our agenda for the day. We have 90 minutes together and we hope to make it through all of it and also have some time at the end to answer questions. So I will hand it over to Caroline to get us started.
Thank you, Shannon. So the first section of our presentation today is types of immigration status overview. Well, and first and foremost, let me say hello to everyone. Thank you for being here. And I'm really excited to provide this presentation with Janice and Shannon today. All right, so today we're talking about immigration eligibility as it pertains to the health insurance marketplace, also known as healthcare.gov. And I want to lead with the fact that we'll be talking about the marketplace specifically as healthcare.gov throughout the presentation. And I want to highlight the fact is because we have seen with consumers from time and time again, when they look up marketplace on Google or anywhere on a browser, typically when they just put in marketplace, it will lift up some scams as some of the first choices that they'll encounter. And so we really have been pushing as an organization, healthcare.gov on a lot of our outreach materials, and just moving forward, we'll try to talk about healthcare.gov first, also acknowledging that we will be using health insurance marketplace. But when we start to talk to the people that you serve, think about using healthcare.gov first, and then explain that that is the health insurance marketplace. Also, if we're using the Spanish site, that's cuidadodesalud.gov. And I just want to cover that first and foremost, since we'll be talking about it quite a bit. We'll also be looking at the Medicaid programs that impact the immigrant community. When we talk about eligibility for these two particular areas of healthcare coverage, we're not talking about other eligibility pieces. We're not going to be talking really too deeply into income and household size. So there are other factors that may impact someone's eligibility for the slew of programs that we discussed today. But we really will be focusing on the qualifying immigrant statuses. So Medicaid, first and foremost, uses the term qualifying immigrants or US citizens or qualifying immigrants in a lot of their language. And we'll kind of discuss what that means and looks like. And then the health insurance marketplace uses the term US citizen or national or be lawfully present. And we'll kind of dive into what that looks like as well. This is a cheat sheet slide for you all. I would even recommend if you wanted to print it, just so that you had this in your enrollment assister materials when you're helping a consumer. It's a nice, easy way to see what programs people might qualify right away if they have the appropriate immigrant status for that program, and what programs, even if you have that eligible status, require a 5-year wait period. We'll get into each program individually, but I wanted to bring attention to this one slide because this will be a nice quick resource once this presentation is all said and done. I want to emphasize too that there are several categories, regardless of the program, that there are exceptions to the 5-year wait period. In particular, children, pregnant women, people with refugee asylee, and other key statuses are exempt from the 5-year wait period in most Medicaid programs. And so it's really just a nice summary of what we'll discuss throughout the program today. All right, so now we'll get into some Medicaid program eligibility. So when we talk about Medicaid programs, like I mentioned, they define an eligible immigrant status as US citizens or qualifying immigrants. What that means, the most common statuses that we'll see that qualify for Medicaid programs are US nationals and US citizens, including citizens of the US that are from Puerto Rico, Guam, US Virgin Islands, Northern Mariana Islands, and naturalized citizens, so people who become citizens throughout their time in the US. Refugees and asylees are also a common status that qualify for Medicaid. Some visa types, like victims of domestic abuse and human trafficking, permanent residents, as long as they meet that 5-year wait period, and then Iraqi Afghan special immigrant visa holders, and grant withholding of deportation or removal statuses. And as you'll see at the bottom, and we'll talk about in their specific section, emergency services and Badger Care prenatal programs have different eligibility rules. So when we talk about Medicaid programs as a whole, we're usually not including those two programs in particular because they allow for a variety of immigrant statuses, including undocumented or people in that 5-year wait period that other Medicaid programs normally would not allow for. And then there are some new statuses that no longer have to wait that 5 years for Medicaid eligibility. So people from the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, and the Republic of Palau are a part of the Compacts of Free Association. And so they have another additional waiver of that 5-year wait eligibility notice. All right, so as we mentioned, children, do not have to have that 5-year wait period for Medicaid. And we like to emphasize their eligibility because in many cases, we see a lot of families with mixed immigration status where maybe the parents are undocumented or a member of the family is undocumented, but the children are US citizens. And some parents will feel anxious about enrolling their children into programs like Medicaid. And so we want to emphasize that children that are born in the US are eligible for Badger Care Plus, even if their parents are not, and they can apply without including, they have to include their parents as head of household for the application, but they do not have to include any other additional information about their parent. It would only be the information about the child in order to find them eligible for Medicaid. And I use Medicaid and Badger Care Plus interchangeably. Please bear with me for that common talk. Oh, I'm sorry, Shannon, could you go back? I just want to make sure. Yes, and then we'll talk a little more about public charge, but a children's enrollment in Badger Care does not negatively impact their parents wanting to change their immigration status in the future. All right, thank you. All right, then there's Katie Beckett. So Katie Beckett Medicaid is Medicaid for children with disabilities and special health care needs that might have a higher income, but still might be able to qualify for this program. And this would also not require the 5-year wait period for permanent resident children. So another program to consider when wanting to help a child who is an immigrant apply for coverage. Then there's the elderly, blind, disabled Medicaid. There is a 5-year wait period for adults that qualify for elderly, blind, and disabled Medicaid. This program can cover long-term care facilities and hospital stays. And it is an important piece because it can also assist if someone has a disability but is not eligible for Medicare. And so it is a program that does require the 5-year wait period, but still an option for many folks. And then there's the Medicaid purchase plan. So this is this is for a person that has a disability, but is working or interested in working or volunteering. And so it allows them to access coverage and potentially allows them to access coverage at a higher income. There is a 5-year wait period for this program as well, but it's an option for someone that has these needs and can qualify with this with their immigration status. All right, and then the Medicare savings programs. These are this is a Medicaid program that allows Medicare savings. It helps based on income and the assets that someone has to reduce the cost of Medicare Part A if they have a cost to it. And it also allows them to get additional savings on some programs, particularly prescriptions and things like that. And it is available to qualified immigrants. There is that 5-year wait period with this program as well. And then, as I mentioned, Badger Care Plus Prenatal and Emergency Services does not have the 5-year wait period. And you'll see that in that chart that I created. Badger Care Prenatal are for pregnant women who do not qualify for Medicaid based on their immigration status. So this program is available for people who are undocumented, people who have an immigrant status where they would have to wait that 5 years to qualify for traditional Medicaid. So that's an option for them. And then emergency services, I think we have a slide on the next page that goes a little more deeper. Oh, I'm sorry. We go into each of them. So Badger Care Prenatal, as I mentioned, are for pregnant women who do not qualify for traditional Medicaid. And then it lasts until the pregnancy ends. And then women are eligible for 60 days of emergency services. We'll go on to the next slide, which is emergency services. So emergency services are also available for children, adults 65 and older, adults with disabilities, and adults caring for children at home, so adults with dependent children, and pregnant women. In the case of a medical emergency, and so there has to be a doctor that determines that their situation is considered an emergency where there's potential loss of life or limb. And then any immigrant status where they would not otherwise qualify for Medicaid. Excuse me. So that would be an undocumented status or legally present, but they're in that 5-year wait period. And then household salary and income does vary depending on the age of the individual. But we have this nice handy chart, and I apologize for, I think I need a little bit of water. But these are the income levels, but it does vary based on adult, child, different ages of children, and if you are a pregnant woman. One thing that is important regarding emergency services is that this did not get extended to adults without dependent children. So as the state's Medicaid program it added that included eligibility for adults back in 2014. They did not do the same because the two programs are not connected. And so adults without dependent children, unfortunately, do not qualify for emergency services. All right, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the public health emergency, or as we know it, the COVID-19 pandemic. So with the federal government determining that COVID-19 is a pandemic and that is a public health emergency, it extended a rule that allowed states to, it essentially required states to maintain people's coverage if they were enrolled in Medicaid and Badger Care Plus. So we know that many people may have lost their jobs during the pandemic, may have transitioned because they were caring for family members, and because of the change in their income and household situation, were able to sign up for the state's Medicaid program. And by being able to do that, that means even if they've experienced a change over these last 2 to 3 years, they are currently still able to remain on Badger Care. They may be still receiving those services. And as we currently know it, 1.5 million Wisconsinites have Medicaid benefits. So the public health emergency at this point in time is scheduled to end on July 16th. It may or may not get extended. We will know for sure by May 16th if it will be July 16th. And when that happens, that means people will need to reapply, renew their coverage, or transition to different coverage depending on their eligibility of the program. To see if they will remain on Badger Care Plus. So let me reiterate, they will need to either reapply or renew their Medicaid coverage. And depending on if they are found still eligible for the program, will either get to keep their benefits or they may need to transition to another type of health insurance coverage. So it'll be really important for all of us to be working together to make sure that we help these individuals, all these 1.5 million people, get the coverage that they need and will allow them to access the care that they need for their families. So those letters to those individuals will be on a rolling basis based on when it is time for them to renew, starting when the public health emergency ends. So we have time to find out, but it'll be important for folks to be aware of this. And what we're asking folks to do right now, so if you're talking to consumers and you know that this might be happening in the near future, and really what people should be doing regularly is keeping their information current with the Badger Care office, with the income maintenance office. What that means is going to access.wi.gov or the My Access app and keeping their address, phone number, and email address updated, because that's how they'll be reached to let them know that it's time for them to renew. downloading the My Access app. Any smartphone has it in their app store, and you can sign up for push notifications so that the individual can get an alert also when it's time for them to renew, or if they have a new message in their account. And then, of course, letting them know that if they get any mail from the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, to check that and then take action if there are actionable steps. And of course, covering Wisconsin and many of our partners that provide enrollment assistance will be preparing and getting ready to help those individuals if they have any questions. All right, so that was all Medicaid. Whew, we made it. Now we're going to get into, oh, sorry.
Caroline, I'm going to pause here.
Sure.
We're going to go through some of the Medicaid questions that came in, because I think it would be prudent to do so before we talk about healthcare.gov. So
absolutely,
I'm going to work my way backwards through some of these questions, since the emergency services is kind of fresh in our minds from the presentation. So our first question is to clarify, for pregnant people on Badger Care Plus prenatal, they're eligible for 60 days of emergency postpartum services after the pregnancy. And this participant is seeking clarification on the income limit. So the 306% of FPL, that extends into the emergency services after the pregnancy at that higher income limit. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I would have to confirm that, because I believe I'm not sure at this moment. I would want to double check. Oh, Courtney does say that's right.
Okay.
So our colleague does say that's right. So then, yeah, so pregnant women would remain eligible at that 306% of the federal poverty level. Thank you, Courtney. Good save.
Great. And then our next question, I believe this is about emergency services. I think we just got the maybe letters mixed up, but it's about qualifying for emergency service, adults qualifying for emergency services if they don't have children.
So they cannot qualify for emergency services if they are an adult without dependent children. So that means we would need to connect them to a qualified health center or a free clinic in order to access the care that they may need. There are also some really helpful programs through the hospitals in terms of ongoing care that can be connected based on income, like charity care services, to get them care that might be more imminent. But it'll be important to be working with those clinics in order to advocate on behalf of that consumer.
Great, thanks. And then we have another emergency services question related to pregnancy. So the question is, for emergency services after pregnancy, is it any service or just related to the pregnancy?
So typically, Badger Care Prenatal is specific to the pregnancy. So the care needed for the person to have a healthy birth outcome. When we're talking about emergency services, it's based on what the technical emergency at hand is related to. And so because the woman or a person would have just given birth, it would be what the doctor determines is needed for that person's care.
Great. And then, okay, I'm going to go back to some earlier content. Sure. And this question is about folks with green cards. So if a person has only had their green card for a month and their income is at 100% of the federal poverty level, will there be new rules that allow them to attain Medicaid within a 2-year period?
So that's a great question. And I don't know if there are any planned new rules coming down the legislative process. But as it currently stands, if someone has their green card for a month, they would still be subject to that 5-year wait period unless they're a pregnant person or a child, or well, and in this case, they're a resident green card holder. So they would need to find health coverage outside of the standard Medicaid programs. So in this case, if we're talking about Medicaid, it could be emergency services depending on the condition that they're dealing with. But what I would suggest, and what we'll talk about in just a moment, would be healthcare.gov and the health insurance marketplace, getting them connected, because even just at 100% of the federal poverty level, or even under 100% of the federal poverty level, they will qualify for financial help to help reduce the cost of those health insurance plans. In some cases, even finding some free options or plans under $50 a month.
Great, thank you. And we know, I will just add that we know that there was proposed legislation, the Lift the Bar Act, but that has not gone anywhere in terms of changing the wait period for permanent residents and Medicaid. So here is one. Question is, does an undocumented child who turns 18 become ineligible for Medicaid?
So I'm sorry, so an undocumented child who turns 18 become ineligible for emergency services?
We just wrote Medicaid, so I think we should clarify that the eligibility of this child in the first place.
Sure. So a child who is undocumented would be eligible potentially for emergency services depending on their healthcare situation. Otherwise would need to go to a community health center or a free clinic to get primary healthcare, so ongoing healthcare that might not be an emergency, for example. If they are dealing with an emergency situation and they do turn 18, then yes, technically they may no longer be eligible for emergency services because they would be an adult that, and in our circumstance, we're talking about an adult without a dependent child. So they would no longer be eligible for emergency services and will need to fall back on what I mentioned, which is access to care through a community health center or a free clinic.
Okay. So we have additional questions, but I think we're going to move on in the presentation and we'll loop back and address some of these questions. I think some of them will get addressed when we talk about healthcare.gov, and then the ones that aren't, we will answer later in the presentation.
Absolutely. All right, so now we're getting to healthcare.gov, also known as the health insurance marketplace. But remember, we're really pushing the healthcare.gov, cuidado de salud.gov. We want people to make sure they get to the right site before anything else. So when we talk about immigration eligibility for healthcare.gov, I like to think about who is not eligible, because in most cases, if you have a verifiable status, in many cases, you will qualify for healthcare.gov coverage. So the people that are not eligible through healthcare.gov are immigrants who are considered undocumented, people who qualify under the deferred action for childhood arrivals, because unfortunately they did not extend eligibility to this group, even though they do have a social security number and a work permit. Unfortunately, that does not make them eligible. And then folks with traveler visas, which we'll get into a little more further. I did put links on this site or on this page that bring you to healthcare.gov's website, where you can see the long list of covered immigration statuses, as well as the link that is highlighted under the word verified, where you can see what type of verification or proof is required to make sure that that application goes smoothly. So as I mentioned, folks with tourist visas, which are considered B1 or B2 visas, visitor for business or tourist, are here in the country, technically legally, but unfortunately, because it's a temporary visa with their condition of getting their visa that they will be going back to their home country, it does not work to get them essentially permanent coverage, because one of the pieces of getting coverage through healthcare.gov is that you're stating that you will remain in the place that you're accessing that coverage, that you're a resident of that place that you're accessing coverage. So in that case, visa tourist visas do not work. And then this is where we then talk about those folks that are in that 5-year wait period for Medicaid, people who do not qualify because they're in that wait period, people who do not qualify for free Medicare because they don't have the work credits to qualify for free Part A. They all can qualify for healthcare.gov coverage, even if their income is below 100% of the federal poverty level. So what that means is that someone who traditionally would be eligible for Medicaid, but is in that gap 5 years, they can sign up on healthcare.gov and also get the financial tax credits, financial help to help pay for that coverage. And in most cases, they're looking at really low costing plans. So one thing that we've also been seeing regarding healthcare.gov is that some people do have a qualifying status, but because of how they file their taxes and maybe how they're required to file their taxes based on their immigrant status, they end up having to pay back tax credits. So it's really important to know that to qualify for tax credits, if someone is married, they have to file married as jointly, or they have to be able to file married filing jointly, head of household, or single. We noticed that there are some circumstances, particularly with some immigration statuses, where they are required to file married filing separately if they are married, and it does not allow them to get those tax credits. Because that's the case, we want to make sure that people have access to this information. There are some exceptions where that individual might be able to file as a single or head of household based on the reason why they are not with their spouse. So it's important to look into, and it's also important to reach out to a tax expert. As enrollment assisters, we are not tax experts. And so if anytime you get into a situation where the consumer that you're helping with is dealing with at least some nuance where you're not sure, it's not straightforward, the best bet is to find that tax expert that can help them through this process. And then we'll once again talk about public charge a little later, but it's really important to remind you that tax credits are not a public benefit, so they do not impact someone trying to change their immigration status, and they should not be a concern if someone is being sponsored. All right, and this is where, well, I don't know if there's questions now or you want to wait till later, but I appreciate you all listening to my section of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. We do have some additional questions, and I think we will address them. I feel confident about the slides remaining and the amount of time we have. So I'm going to sort through a few of these. Here is an excellent scenario question. So the question is, what do you recommend for a couple who is interested in coverage through the marketplace, but the husband is a US citizen and the wife does not have an immigration status? Can the husband go to the marketplace and the wife go off market, or do they both have to go off market?
That's a great question. And Yes, they can both, well, I'm sorry, they can go to healthcare.gov. The husband as a US citizen can get coverage. They will ask about household size, and so you will need to give information that his partner lives with him, that what her income is, because they would ultimately be needing to file jointly because they are married. But they wouldn't need to include any information like social security or any other information regarding her, because she is not seeking enrollment. And she would then be able to look for coverage outside of the marketplace, or in most cases would seek care through a community health center or a free clinic.
Great, thank you. Okay, this is going back to the Medicaid section. So the question is, what happens when someone loses their permanent residence card and wants to apply for Medicaid? What proof can be provided in this case?
Oh, that they physically lost their card.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. So I would imagine that they would need to see if they can seek a replacement with their their local immigration office. And I don't know how easy that is. So please don't think I'm writing that off as, oh, that's simple. But Janice might actually have an answer to that piece of it. But I think having the correct numbers and US ID codes that are listed on the green card, as long as that's entered correctly, they might request verification of that after the fact, and you usually have 3 months to provide that physical photocopy of the information. But if you get it as accurate as possible, sometimes it just automatically goes through because they're check referencing the databases that they have behind the scenes on healthcare.gov.
Great. Janice, is there anything you want to add to that?
Sure, I can just quickly say that, yes, when somebody is a permanent resident, even if their card is lost or mutilated, they still maintain their permanent resident status. And indeed, they can apply for a replacement card. And yeah, they should see either a DOJ accredited rep or an immigration attorney for that. The only piece of information too that I want to add here is, at least now at this time, the processing times are incredibly backlogged, and it can take a long period of time to get that replacement card.
Great, thank you for giving us a larger picture of the situation. Okay. Here is a question going back to emergency services. So if someone has a tourist visa and had if someone with a tourist visa had emergency service needs in the US and has dependents back in their home country, would they be eligible for emergency services?
So with that particular description, my assumption would be yes, that they are an adult with dependent children who is in an emergency situation, that yes, they would ultimately qualify for emergency services. But one thing to always remember, even through this presentation, we are not the ultimate answer of determining eligibility, and the best bet that anyone can do in any of these situations is apply. Apply on access.wi.gov, apply if they're in that emergency situation with the enrollment specialists that are in the hospitals, apply in any circumstance, and the state will ultimately determine if that person is eligible.
Great, thanks, Caroline. And I will say, I've seen that come up, and encourage the application, and like you shared, they will make the determination. They'll ask the appropriate questions about the dependents and where they are, and they'll make the determination, because it can be somewhat complex. So we have a question here about, someone is saying, I think I'm confusing emergency services and alien emergency. Are they the same or are they different? I do not know what alien emergency would be referring to. I don't know if Janice or Caroline, if that's a familiar term for either of you.
No, and it may be one in the same, just another name that people have used in the past for it, but we are talking about Medicaid emergency services. Even if you Google Badger Care Plus emergency services, the handbook, the Wisconsin handbook typically comes up, and you can look at in more detail the eligibility rules that are listed.
And then we had another question about emergency services for children. So I'll just put the household size and income up there, because the question is the income limit for emergency services for a child still 100% FPL, or is it higher? And you can see here that this actually is different based on the age of the child.
Yes, it is higher than 100% of the federal poverty level, but each age group has a different federal poverty level. And it's because it doesn't necessarily coincide with standard Badger Care Plus for children. It actually is a separate program eligibility level limit. So I'm sorry, I can't give you a better answer than that, but they are different.
Okay. So here's another one going back to emergency services. Does the consortium ask for medical documentation from providers and the treating facility to complete a case for emergency services?
That's a great question about verification, and I don't have in detail. I think it may vary based on the situation, but we can follow up if there is more concrete information about what verification is required. Most cases, emergency services is applied for during said emergency, usually by an enrollment specialist or social worker in a hospital setting. But there are cases where someone who is seeking ongoing care because it would result in said emergency, for example, dialysis, cancer treatment, that also has been seen as an eligible emergency. So it really does vary case by case.
Okay, great. And then we just had some discussion about that alien emergency services and where people see that crop up. So thanks for sharing insight there. Nothing like a good crowdsourced response.
Absolutely.
Okay. We'll do maybe two more here and then we will move along. And so we have a question about what is the federal poverty level for Katie Beckett Medicaid?
Wow.
And I think we could group this. We have a larger question just to talk briefly more about the Katie Beckett Medicaid program. And I can share that the way income gets determined for Katie Beckett Medicaid is a little bit unique. And part of the reason we wanted to highlight this program, because some people don't know about it. And so they're looking at, it's a very specially designed program. And so we really encourage people to call that number and get help, because the income considerations are different in how they determine like what income they look at. And so I can't give you off the cuff like what the cutoff is, because there's a lot of like exceptions and things of that nature. So if you're helping a consumer who has a child with a disability or a special healthcare need, and you're wondering about might they be eligible for this program, the best thing really to do is call.
Well said, Shannon.
Okay, so I think we will move on from there and we will attend to these additional questions later.
Great questions, everyone.
Yeah, great questions. All right, so take it away, Janice.
Thank you. Thanks, Caroline, for outstanding presentation. So now we're going to talk an overview of our Afghan evacuees and their eligibility for public benefits. So what we're talking about here is the Afghans who were evacuated out of Afghanistan, and they were granted what's called humanitarian parole. So that provides a grant of lawfully residing in the United States for 2 years, and specifically the parole was granted somewhere in between July 31st, 2021, and it will continue through September 30th, 2022. So these folks are currently eligible for public benefit programs without a waiting period. There are 3 common statuses, different statuses of the Afghan evacuees. And so some of them are, and in particular, are those who have been granted special immigrant visas. They're eligible for resettlement assistance through the Reception and Placement Program. So this is the program that has been in place that the refugee agencies across Wisconsin use to resettle refugees and also SIVs. But then there's also a new program called the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program that was created by the Department of State, in particular to provide assistance to the Afghan evacuees. So if we move to the next slide, we can see that, whoops, one back. There we go. Here we can see an overview that whether our Afghan evacuees are receiving assistance through the traditional reception and placement program or through the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program, also known as APA. In this chart, that would be the humanitarian parole between July 31st, 2021 and September 30th, 2022. They're eligible for all these benefits. And they're currently being resettled throughout Wisconsin. There's approximately, I'm just going to give an approximate number of about 840 evacuees that are being resettled across the state right now. So here are some resources to provide further guidance about our Afghan evacuees. The USA Hello provides a guide that lists the status categories and benefit options. And then the Wisconsin Department of Health provides health resources, culturally informed specifically for our Afghan arrivals. The Immigrant Advocate Network lists nonprofit immigration legal service providers. And so, for example, the question that just came up earlier about replacing a green card or other immigration legal questions that come up, and you're thinking, where can I find an affordable immigration legal representation? So there's a few resources here. The first one is the Immigrant Advocates Network, where you can go to the website and click on Wisconsin, and they're going to give you a list of nonprofit immigration legal service providers, and they'll also list the categories of services that each organization provides. And next we have a link to the Department of Justice recognized organizations and accredited representatives. So I'm an accredited representative, a DOJ accredited representative. This means that I am authorized to practice immigration law through my nonprofit organization, specifically here, the Catholic Multicultural Center, to represent, provide immigration legal representation, and differs from private attorneys in that the focus of this program, national program, is to increase capacity for immigration legal representation. It's affordable. We never turn anybody down due to inability to pay. And I couldn't practice privately. I can only practice like through my nonprofit. So clicking this link and you'll get a list of, actually a nice robust list throughout the state of Wisconsin of DOJ recognized agencies and accredited reps who also can provide that immigration legal representation. And in fact, replacement of a green card, it's a perfect place to call. It'll be affordable and a service that's certainly provided by the majority of DOJ accredited reps. And then finally, the Switchboard Connecting Resettlement Experts. It's an excellent roundup of resources. It includes policies and resources for the Office of Refugee Resettlement, the Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, cultural orientation, again, immigration legal needs, health, wellness, more. It's really an outstanding resource. So I encourage you to spend a little time perusing that website. So here we have a map of our refugee resettlement agencies throughout Wisconsin. In Dane County, Jewish Social Services, we have 2 refugee resettlement agencies in the Milwaukee area, the International Institute of Wisconsin, as well as Lutheran Social Services, World Relief in Fox Valley, Catholic Charities of Green Bay. In Wausau, we have the Multicultural Community Center. Some of these resettlement agencies, in fact, are also DOJ recognized agencies with accredited representatives. So they're really outstanding resources, in particular, the International Institute, as well as Catholic Charities of Green Bay and World Relief are all, you can find accredited reps at all of those agencies. You'll see off to the side of our map, we have some other locations of where, this is in particular where Afghans are being resettled: Platteville, Eau Claire, Glendale, and Kenosha Racine. With the resettlement of Afghans, there are burgeoning alternative models to resettlement because the refugee resettlement agencies are at capacity. And so there are now some alternative resettlement models, which in short, we have some nonprofit, or some NGOs, nonprofit groups that function independently of government, faith-based organizations that partner with Church World Services. And there's even what's called sponsorship circles. You might have heard about this, where friends can come together and form a sponsorship circle to resettle Afghan evacuees. Should I ask if are there any questions about Afghans before we move to Ukrainians?
That is a good point. Let me look.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing any, no, I don't see any Afghan specific questions. So I think we can go ahead and move on, and we can do the general immigration questions after the Ukrainian section.
Sounds great. So now we're going to move forward and talk a little bit about our Ukrainian arrivals. And I did just want to, I mentioned how I'm a DOJ accredited rep. But initially, I've been working with refugees and immigrants for over 3 decades now. And the first 15 years of my work was in fact focused on refugee resettlement, and specifically with Jewish refugees from the former Soviet Union, many of whom are now in touch with me because of their relatives who are in the Ukraine. So here, this gives a timeline of the arrival and it gives like the background of the variety of immigration legal statuses that we're going to see with our Ukrainians. So I remember this morning vividly. I got up early on March 24th, had the news on and saw flashing across the scene the screen that the United States is going to be resettling 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. And my first thought was, well, how are we going to do that so quickly? Because in general, the refugee resettlement process is very lengthy and takes many years before folks can immigrate here with refugee status. So you'll notice the wording here through various legal pathways, but on March 24th, we had no idea what that was going to mean. And so we were kind of suspended in midair for almost a month until on April 21st, when President Biden announced this new streamlined process for Ukrainians called Uniting for Ukraine. But in between that, shortly after the announcement, we saw that Ukrainians were starting to arrive at the US border through Mexico. This is because they could get a tourist visa to travel to Mexico, and then they entered the United States through the border, and those folks were paroled in for less than a year, and in fact, for 364 days, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then also there is on April 18th, the DHS announced that the registration process for the temporary protective status was open for Ukraine. And then finally, this process, the Uniting for Ukraine, was announced on April 21st. So just here on the screen itself, we have folks who are paroled in, we have folks who are applying for temporary protective status, and now we have this new streamlined process, Uniting for Ukraine. And let's talk about that for a minute. So new program, we are still learning the details about it, but this is a way for Ukrainians and their immediate family members who are outside the United States to come to the United States temporarily up to 2 years. They're paroled in. So parole is not an immigration status, but it allows folks to reside lawfully in the United States, in this case, for up to 2 years, and they can apply for work authorization. Part and parcel of this new process is that they must have the new term. Initially, when it was announced, it was sponsor, but now it's been switched to supporter because there's so much confusion between how sponsor is traditionally used in immigration. So a supporter in the United States who agrees to provide financial support for the duration of their stay in the United States. They need to complete a form called I-134. It's a declaration of financial support. And if we go to the next screen, okay. Later, we do have a link of resources. So if you want to learn more details about this program, we provide a link and you can learn about more of the details. So for the Ukrainian population, we have quite a variety of immigration statuses. So some will be applying for asylum or withholding of deportation and removal. So that's one application. Some, as I mentioned, particularly with the Uniting for Ukraine program, they're paroled in for more than a year, up to 2 years. Others have been paroled in for less than a year. We have some folks here who are on B1 and B2 visas, business and tourist visas. They might be applying for asylum. Others might be applying for temporary protected status. Some might be applying for a few different immigration legal benefits at the same time. We're hoping that we will have refugees. It looks like that process is being put in place in the future. Asylees we talked about. And then there's the another type of parole issued. It's called the Lautenberg Parolee. This is a family reunification program. It was initially enacted in 1990 to facilitate the resettlement of Jews from the former Soviet Union. So, and in fact, I've resettled Lautenberg parolees back in the day when I was doing that work. So since then it's been expanded. This program has been expanded to include other persecuted religious minorities. And if somebody is eligible to enter the United States as a Lautenberg parolee, since it is a family resettlement, a family reunification program, the family member here in the United States would need to work with a resettlement agency.
Okay, so next we're going to review the healthcare eligibility for a few of the immigration statuses that apply to Ukrainian displaced persons. And we're going to just go through a subset of these statuses that you would be likely to be seeing now or soon, rather than review them all. So for those who are here and have humanitarian parole for more than 365 days, we know for Medicaid, if they would be income eligible, that adults would have a 5-year wait from their date of parole to be eligible for Medicaid or Badger Care Plus. Pregnant women and children would be eligible now. And in terms of marketplace or healthcare.gov and tax credits, all these individuals would be eligible to apply for health insurance on healthcare.gov and to receive the APTCs. If someone has been paroled into the United States for less than a year or less than 365 days, we know as an adult that they would be not eligible for Badger Care or Medicaid. Pregnant women and children would be eligible if they meet the income and other criteria. And again, for healthcare.gov and the tax credits, that everyone would be eligible to apply for a plan on healthcare.gov and apply for tax credits. For applicants for asylum or withholding of deportation or removal, for adults, if they've been granted employment authorization or if it's a child of 14 or less, once that withholding of deportation or removal has been pending for 180 days, here's what we know. So adults are not eligible for Badger Care or Medicaid. Pregnant women and children are, and they don't have that waiting period that we talked about early on in the presentation. And then again, for healthcare.gov and tax credits, everyone is eligible to apply for coverage and then also for the tax credits. And for those who have temporary protected status or TPS, which is a category that people will be applying for maybe applying for now and in the near future. So this is a status you wouldn't likely see today, but you might see soon for Ukrainian displaced persons. Adults are not eligible. Adults with this status are not eligible for Medicare or Badger Care Plus, but pregnant women and children are. And again, with the marketplace, with healthcare.gov and the tax credits, everyone can apply and receive tax credits who have this status. Finally, we wanted to very briefly review food share eligibility for these various immigration statuses. I'm not going to read through this slide. I just want you to know that it's there. And also just to note that it is different. Eligibility for food share is different than for Badger Care Plus or Medicaid. But again, as we shared before, you know, it is the income consortia who do the eligibility determinations. And so we always encourage people, because it is a joint application, to apply for both and let the consortia sort out what people are and aren't eligible for, as they will, you know, regardless. But in terms of just helping people to set expectations, we wanted to share this information. And if you want to learn more about Ukrainian displaced persons, we provided some recommended organizations and links to those organizations to learn more about the various statuses and the programs available. So I think before we move on to the next section, we will go through questions, because we have had more questions, immigration specific questions come through. So I will put those to Janice first, and then Caroline and I can pinch it as needed there. So we had one participant ask, what happens after 2 years with the folks from Afghanistan?
That's an outstanding question. So the immigration legal situation of the Afghan evacuees is very complex, because they were paroled in, and parole in and of itself does not provide a pathway to a green card and then US citizenship. And so we are, those of us who are advocates in the community are doing our best to, and not just advocates, but able to provide immigration legal representation to make sure that the Afghans have access to immigration legal representation, because they're going to need to apply for other pathways in order to get green cards. And it's going to, each situation is different. And I mean, I can talk about it for hours, but in 1 minute or less, the brief overview is that some of them had started the special immigrant visa process, and they were in the middle of that when they were evacuated. And so those folks can finish that process here and get their green cards that way. Others have relatives who are US citizens or green card holders, lawful permanent residents, and they might be eligible to apply for their green cards through the family-based immigration legal process. And then others, and this is where we're really having nationwide issues with capacity for immigration legal representation, are applying for asylum. So it's a very complex situation, and in the resources that were provided, you can also learn more about that, and you're also very welcome to contact me if you're interested in more details.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Great, thank you. So we have a question about Title 42, which maybe, Janice, I don't know if you feel comfortable, but maybe you could just briefly address what Title 42 is. And then the question is, what will the plan be if Title 42 is lifted and immigrants arrive in Milwaukee and other Wisconsin areas? And I'll just say, like, we are not the folks making that plan, so we do not have it, we do not know about it, but we can at least explain what Title 42 is for the group.
So yeah, Title 42, basically, we have our immigrants who are at the southern border and aren't allowed to come in because of the health emergency, because of COVID. And so they're basically asylum seekers who are now waiting to get into the United States. And it's a very complex situation. And yeah, it's an outstanding question. And I'd be very happy, Shannon, to provide some articles and resources on the topic.
Right, we can make those available along with the presentation when we do that. We had a question about, or a point, which I think is important, about warning people about using notarios or other non-accredited immigration assisters. So Janice, maybe you can just speak briefly about that.
I love that question. Thank you. It is just thank you everybody for continuing to get the word out as much as possible, that our immigrants need to work with immigration attorneys, DOJ accredited reps. There are so many folks out there, way too many folks who are taking advantage of our communities by saying that they'll help them with immigration legal representation, help get a green card, help get work authorization. And when I am giving any type of presentation, immigration legal presentation, I always have a slide that says the wrong help can hurt. And this also includes sometimes very, very kind-hearted, volunteers that and other folks who are trying their best to help. But the best way to help is to get those resources out there. We provided two of them today, the Immigrant Advocate Network and also DOJ accredited reps. So the more resources we can get out for those who can afford the private attorney. There's the AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association. I can give you that link as well, Shannon, where they have a list of private immigration attorneys across the state who can help. There's also, I want to briefly mention a new program that's going to be rolling out. The Catholic Charities in Milwaukee is spearheading it, but it's in coordination in conjunction with other nonprofits across the state, where there will be pro bono attorneys who are going to be helping our Afghans apply for asylum. So thank you for asking the question, and please, everybody, let's do our best to get these resources out there.
Great. I think we'll proceed with the rest, and I know people have asked questions, and we will get to the rest of the questions at the conclusion of the presentation. So keep sending them in if you have them as we move through the presentation. So next, we wanted to share some resources for people with DACA or an undocumented immigration status. So these would be folks who don't qualify for health insurance coverage from Medicaid or the marketplace, with the exclusion of emergency services, which we talked about earlier. And so where can you connect them to get the healthcare that they need? So we recommend that you refer these folks to community health centers and free clinics, that you help them check for community and charity care programs through their local medical services providers, so at hospitals and clinics, to ask for those applications and help people to complete them. That for pregnant women or pregnant persons, that you connect them with the Badger Care Plus prenatal program. And as we talked before, if the condition is an emergency, that you check to see if the emergency services program is an option. And then just a note here that people with deferred action for childhood arrival, that DACA status, they can get employer-sponsored plans and purchase private plans. So now we're going to talk briefly about public charge. There was a question that came through the chat somewhat related to this, but this is always an important concept to address when we're talking about immigrant eligibility for any public benefit program. So public charge is defined as someone who the federal government determines to become likely dependent on the government for basic needs. And if someone is considered a public charge by the US Citizenship and Immigration Services or the US Department of State, this could impact their ability to do the following three things: to gain a visa to enter the US, to gain permanent residency, or as we often say, get a green card, or to renew or change an immigration status. A lot of people got very concerned about public charge, and it was in the news a lot during the prior administration, and rules changed during that administration. But those rules that changed under the Trump administration no longer apply. So what is true now is that public benefits for housing, food, and healthcare are safe for everyone to use. They will not hurt a person's immigration status. Getting testing, treatment, and vaccines for COVID-19 also will not hurt a person's immigration status. There are two times when this consideration comes into play, and that's for using long-term care to pay for a facility like a nursing home, or getting cash benefits. And those are the only two times that someone's immigration status may be negatively impacted. But even then, it impacts a very limited number of people. And it's also important to know that the Department of Homeland Security recently proposed a new public charge rule that formalizes the current guidance. And the comments for that rule actually just closed at the end of April. And so we expect something to come out in the next, 60 to 90 days is kind of the typical time frame. So the number one takeaway message we want people to get is applying for or receiving Medicaid benefits or getting savings for health insurance costs on the marketplace will not make anyone a public charge, and it won't impact their chances of becoming a lawful permanent resident or a citizen. And again, just to go back, there is only the exception in terms of the Medicaid programs of people who are receiving long-term care in an institution at a government expense that this could negatively impact. We know that considerations are complex and people have questions, and so we have this resource available. You can jot down the phone number, either the regular phone, the WhatsApp number, or go to this website. And you can do a screening with anyone who is concerned about this, where the tool will take into consideration their unique immigration status and give back information about public charge and whether or not someone should really seek legal advice before accessing a public benefit because of this concern. So next up, we just have a few helpful tips and resources we wanted to share. We're at 12:17, so we're gonna be fine. All right, so new citizens and data exchanges. We just wanna get the word out that when people newly become a US citizen, it's a wonderful time to celebrate, but also to remind them to update their status with the Social Security Administration. This can help, when they're getting a job, when they're seeking Social Security benefits or receiving other government services, to have an accurate status in the system is important. And part of the reason for this is because the marketplace and Medicaid use data exchanges to verify citizenship of applicants. And so having it accurate here will just result in appropriate determinations for eligibility. We wanted to share that as part of the public health emergency unwinding process, that the Department of Health Service, the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, has shared that there's approximately 2,300 Medicaid and Badger Care members who may need to provide proof of their citizenship or immigration status with the Department of Health Services. And they will be sending letters at the end of May to people who need to take this action. And so you may see consumers who receive these letters. And if you can help them navigate the process of verifying their status, that would be great. And then we just wanted to share a few resources. So at Covering Wisconsin, we have a sheet on special enrollment periods on healthcare.gov when people have an immigration status change. We wanted to share that there is a new special enrollment period on healthcare.gov for people with low incomes. And so this is especially significant for recent immigrants with incomes between 0 and 100% of the federal poverty level. And when you're doing an application on healthcare.gov, this special enrollment option will appear automatically based on the income calculation. We wanted to share Healthcare Reform Beyond the Basics as an excellent source of information on immigrants and healthcare enrollment options. They have fact sheets, they have resource guides, they have a lot of nice pictures and just very succinct, useful materials for doing healthcare enrollment with this specific population. And then also Covering Wisconsin has some handouts on healthcare options for undocumented immigrants that talk about emergency services, as you saw in the presentation. And we basically saw the front of this sheet in the presentation, but there is a backside too that can be very helpful. And then here are just some additional resources that are useful and you can dig into at your leisure and as your clients, consumers, and patients sort of demand that you do so to get them the answers they need. So now we've got exactly 10 minutes remaining and we will go back to questions, which I have ignored while I've been talking. So I'm going to sort through them and we'll try to get you some more answers. But if you have a burning question, please submit it.
And Shannon, while you're going through the first couple questions, I just wanted to go back to the question around notarios, just to define what a notario is. So in the US, we are familiar with notaries, and so they're people that can notarize documents. But in Latin American countries, there is a cultural difference of what a notario is, where in many cases, there are folks that can help with a lot of different things. And that's why we see a lot in the Latino community, people going to notarios for issues regarding immigration and other types of things. And so and just another reason to emphasize what Janice said, making sure that folks are going to the right individuals, immigration attorneys and Department of Justice accredited individuals that can help with immigration issues, because the notarios here might not be the same as what a notario in their home country are.
Great. Thanks for that clarification and sharing that point. It is an important one. Okay, so I'm going to start with one question that came through, which is, I'm hearing some suggestions to apply and the state will determine, and sometimes applying could hurt your immigration status. Could you please discuss more when we should and shouldn't be suggesting that clients apply? And I will just share that with the change in public charge rules with the new administration, apply. You're not going to hurt applying for Medicaid or healthcare or applying for a plan on healthcare.gov. I'm starting to lose my voice. Is not going to hurt anyone's status. And so go ahead and help people to submit those applications.
And I would just add too, if you're found eligible for a program, that also is a cue that it most likely will not negatively impact your immigration status, because if it were to, you would most likely not be eligible. I know that sounds cyclic, but it is true.
It's true. And I think part of the important thing to remember with public charge is that a lot of people are very afraid, and that makes a lot of sense. And that the changes that were made in the prior administration were intended to bring fear, and they were successful in that. And so if we can help meet people where they're at and help guide them through the changes that have occurred and provide good, solid information to help them make decisions, that's ideal. And be trusted partners in these communities, because it is tough and people are afraid.
I have
Janice,
to chime in here too.
Yeah.
So, because I feel like we can't emphasize this enough. And also to just throw this fact out that even under the prior administration, with those changes in public charge, which are no longer in effect, there were nationally, I believe, Shannon, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 denials, was it 2? And then they were later approved. So in fact, nobody's green card applications even were denied because of the public charge. But this chill effect that it has had is has unfortunately been very successful. And so here we are, again, to just get that good information now and help folks have access to the benefits that they are eligible for.
Yeah, so important. All right, so now we're going to dig into some more detailed questions, which is, I have run into some situations helping students to enroll in Badger Care, but parents are not in the picture and only a relative is there for the student. I'm guessing perhaps these are college students. How can I help these students enroll in health insurance?
So these are great questions. And I actually took it as the other way, that maybe they're minor students. So I'm going to answer both. How about that? So if it's a minor student, a minor child, where they're living with a relative, a legal guardian. So if they're living with a legal guardian, they would apply as a household with the legal guardian as the head of household for that application for Medicaid. There are some circumstances, especially for minor students who may be homeless, who are maybe couch surfing or going to shelters and they're on their own, where they would be able to apply on their own as a minor. And there is more nuance to that. They should be able to do it through access.wi.gov, but it also may be easier to call the Income Maintenance Consortia to do the application over the phone with the student. But something to know that you can submit an application with just the student if that is their circumstance. And then if we're talking about an adult student who is off to college, we know under healthcare.gov and the Affordable Care Act that students can stay on their parents' coverage up until the age of 26. And that is if their parents have private health insurance coverage. If their family had Medicaid, then once they turn 19, they would have to apply for Medicaid on their own as an adult. And then finally, if their parents had marketplace coverage and they're an adult, they most likely would have to file or apply on healthcare.gov with their family, even if they're living away from their family, if they're going to be claimed as a dependent. So those are 3 different rules and it can get complicated. So I always reinforce too that Covering Wisconsin is a great resource for those questions. If you are not sure and you just want someone else to double check, feel free to give me a call. Like we'll all answer and help you kind of figure out what next steps are with that consumer. But I hope I kind of got each scenario.
Great. Oh, they said, what if these students are in elementary schools? I'm assuming that was in relation to the question you just addressed, Carolyn.
Yep. So if they're living with the guardian, then they would apply with the guardian as their head of household. If they are considered homeless and on their own, which as unfortunate as it sounds, I hope that's not true for a lot of elementary age children, but could be possible. They would be applying on their own. And then if they're in the foster care system, they would also be applying on their own and would be eligible for Medicaid regardless of income until they turn 26.
Thanks. Okay, we have a question about public charge. So in the future, if a different administration changed the public charge rules, could what a person does now affect them later? What do you think, Janice?
Generally speaking, it's the rule that is in effect now. So that if there were a new rule that went into effect, it would be, applications after that date. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. We have a question about FPLs. Is the FPL for programs using the 2021 FPL guidelines? So I can answer this. For marketplace applications, it is currently the 2021 FPL guidelines. For Medicaid, Badger Care, emergency services, those Medicaid programs we talked about, they have moved on to the 2022 FPL guidelines. So there is a little disparity there. Okay, so we heard a lot about refugees displaced recently, but what about resources for those Swahili-speaking clients we may see and serve?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would, want to know maybe how they immigrated, what their status is, and if they immigrated as refugees, then you should be able to get assistance again through those the refugee resettlement agencies that can help provide guidance with those folks, with those clients. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. And then we'll do one more. We're at 12:30. We're at the end here. We'll take one more question. I'll post the webinar evaluation in the chat, and then we'll follow up with ways you can get in touch with us. So the last question we're going to do is, at our clinic, we are seeing a lot of patients from Central America who are seeking asylum. Are you able to expand on ways in which they may be eligible for health insurance coverage? So I can take this one. We would encourage people to go through the same avenues and apply the same knowledge that when we talked about other folks who are recently arrived in terms of their eligibility for benefits, whether they actually have that asylum status, whether they have that have applied for asylum and received a work permit, or if they're a child of 14 or less, have that 180 days. And then, their eligibility would be determined the same way. You can, of course, put an application in to your consortia if you think they might be eligible, and let that process go forward. And then just helping people who don't have eligibility for Medicaid or the marketplace based on their immigration status, to connect with those programs and communities and community health centers and sliding fee scale services and charity care programs.
And I'm just going to add in one more thing too, and that's that after asylum is granted, please know that those now asylees are eligible for resettlement services from the refugee resettlement agencies. So you can then go back and refer to the resettlement agencies for additional support for asylees after the asylum is granted.
Great, thank you. So I just want to put a plug in for the evaluation. We are a grant-funded organization, and your evaluation is super important to us. Our funders want to know how we're doing and want to know if the information we share impacts the work that you all do, and we're so grateful for the work you all do. So please take 2-3 minutes to complete that evaluation. It should not take you any longer than that. here's how you can get in touch with us. And we will, based on the question that comes through, connect you to the right one of us to chat with more. Please know that we're here. We're highly interested in hearing your questions and providing you with the knowledge and resources you need to do your jobs and to serve patients, clients, community members, consumers across the state. So I just want to share a ton of gratitude for the challenging work that everybody does. And thank you for taking an hour and a half, now an hour and 33 minutes out of your day to join us. We really appreciate it. And we hope that this was useful to you and that you send us our questions. And I know in seeing many of the questions that we have ideas for future presentations. And so we will be working on those. And I'll just put a plug in that, this fall we have a conference and we will likely be addressing immigrant eligibility considerations again at the conference. So look forward to seeing you all there, and stay tuned to our listserv to get updates on future presentations regarding the public health emergency unwinding, other topics like that. So thanks all. Thank you, presenters. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.